Notion charts are here. I can't believe this is actually happening. And I know that I often get excited about Notion updates, but trust me, this one really is a game changer. I mean, just look at this. We have pie charts, bar charts, both horizontal and vertical, stacked bar charts, line charts, and so many options to customize all of them. The kind of dashboards we'll be able to build moving forward will be insane. So in this video, we go over every single thing you need to know to make the most out of Notion charts. How to create your first Notion chart, which chart types are available, every single setting that you can tweak, some hidden tricks and workarounds, and of course the best 12 use cases for Notion charts that you should try out today. Ready? Then let's dive in and see how you can create your first ever Notion chart. Notion charts are implemented in a really cool way. They are basically a new type of view for any database. So that means if I have here my database, I can either click here, right, to create a new view and then pick charts, or I can create link views, right? So let's just do that. Let's say create link view of database, and we can pick my day for charts. And now we can say under the new option, view option, here pops up the chart option. Now, the second I take this, it will pick a random chart that I think fits the data I have in there. And I can then say here, right, do I want to show the database title or not? And then under edit charts is where all the magic happens. So you see in terms of the layout, it is similar to how other database views behave, but a little bit different as well. Because under layout option, right, we just pick this type and then all our settings are here. And they, of course, look a bit different than the settings that we usually have on our databases. But so far, so good. This is the base selection, and we see we have the option to choose one of our 4 chart types, either our normal bar chart, our bar chart from the side, a line chart, or a good old pie chart. Let's actually start with the pie chart because it's the easiest one to understand. The way it works is that we see here under data, we have basically 2 key options. First, what we want to show, and then what each slice represents. And in the beginning, it can be a bit tricky to wrap your head around how this works, but trust me, it makes sense in a moment. So what to show basically means what categories do you want to break this down by, right? So which are the things that should appear here in the legend and then be mapped here. And then for each of these categories, you can then pick, okay, how much should it visualize? In this case, currently what we've picked is we want to show categories, right? That's great. And for each slice, we want to represent the count. So how often does this category appear in our database? And as you can see, 3 food, 2 work, 2 fun, all pretty much correct, and we have our corresponding data labels. Now, if we want to, instead of seeing how many times something pops up, we want to see our time values, all we need to do is go to each slice represents, and here we see all our properties that we have as options. And for properties that have certain aggregation options, for example, numbers, we see then if we hover over that, okay, what do you want to see? So in case I want to see, okay, what is the sum that I spent per category on something? Well, I pick the sum option. Now we see, okay, most of our time is spent on work. Then we have food, fun, and sport. Or if I say, okay, actually, I don't want to see the total amount of time spent. I want to see the average. Then I flip it to that. And again, it changes to on average how much time I spend on each category. Moving on with our options, what we can also, of course, do is change the sort. And the sort applies to in which order, in case of a bar chart, in which order they appear here. For the other charts, of course, in which order these items appear. So on the sort, right, not too many interesting options. We can also hide groups altogether if we don't want to see them, or change, again, like the way and these things disappear. A really fun thing is hidden behind color, because for the first time ever, Notion has more colors than it used to have. So if we click on here, we see now we have auto, we have colorful, and then we can just pick a specific shade. So if for whatever reason we just want to visualize our time in different shades of purple, we could do it like that. Now, one really cool trick is that once you have it set to auto, you can actually sort of customize these values for the colors, because they will map to the categories here that you have there. So if I say, okay, work should actually not be gray, work should be purple. Oops, I'll see like that, and immediately it changes here the bar. And that, very importantly, is currently the only way how you can customize color. So you can't just click on it, right, and say, okay, food should be this color, or gray fun should be this color. You need to have in your database one of these elements that has a color assigned, so a select, multi-select, or progress status type. And then you actually need to use that as a category. So if we wouldn't use any of these categories here, right, if we, for example, would say, let's don't show category, let's show the name, you see it gets all colorful because, of course, there's no specific color assigned to help dinner, dislike, have dinner. This color, there's no color behind here. Only behind these select properties do we have that option. If we go further down our options, we see we have more style options, and this context menu will change depending on which chart type we have. So in this chart, we can always change the height, right? So we can make this whole thing smaller or bigger. We can show a value in the center or not. And we can activate or deactivate the legend. We can also choose whether we want to have data labels, right? So if we don't want to see these things, we can just remove them. Or if we only want to see the name, we could add that and customize it accordingly. Below that, we have, as usual, the option to change source, right? So if I have a different database that I want to actually visualize, I can do that here. And then filters. And this is really, really cool, right? Again, since charts are just database views, you can use all your usual filter tricks on them. Which means, for example, if we say, okay, actually, this might be now my visualization for, let's say, not for work, but for, food, fun, and sports. So for everything that is not work-related. I can just go in here and say, okay, add an advanced filter. We want to see, in terms of categories, we don't want to see the work options, and it immediately disappears and renders the chart accordingly. So much for a pie chart. Now let's quickly look at the other options, starting with bar chart. So here, as you expected, you again pick on the x-axis what it should show, and then on the y-axis you show the amount. So it has changed a little bit in terms of the settings, and you have a few more options. So let's say we want to actually show our categories down below. And in terms of what to show, we again don't want to show the count, but we want to show the time spent on each. And let's pick some here as an option. And we see food, fun, sport, that is actually all shared. And actually, we need to remove our filter so that we see work also again. Now, what we can do in addition to this is we can say, well, again, by our sort options, we can omit 0 values, and then we can also group. And group by is a little bit of a confusing language because actually it does the opposite of grouping. Instead of grouping things together, it splits them apart. So what we can do here is we can say, okay, show me these things, but I now want to see maybe the actual time spent on the individual entries. So we could say group by name. And now we see it breaks down these charts for me into stacked bar charts. And I can see, okay, for fun, that meant build magic in Notion and play magic. For work, it meant help a company adopt Notion and work on Notion on YouTube video. So I think the naming here for grouping is a bit confusing, but basically it allows you, to add like another dimension to your chart to break it down. Of course, here we can also then sort for the individual entries. And very important, under more style options, if we have grouping enabled, we now see the group style. And here we can move it from stacked to %, then you just get this relative value. And even more importantly, you can have it not stacked. So in a lot of use cases, right, where you want to have the situation where these things are next to each other, and then you have the individual bars and see, okay, how much time do I spend per thing in work or any of the other things. Apart from that, not much changes in the settings. We have under the style options also now the option to, show our axis name, show grid lines. These are like all small things, so you'll figure them out when you play around with them. If we move to a horizontal bar, of course, it's pretty much the same visualization. We can still choose to group things, right? So we can say, okay, please group by name. And then actually on our style options, I want to have them again stacked. So I now just see them vertically, exactly the same options, just that x-axis and y-axis is now swapped. The nice thing about Notion is it will automatically swap that for you. So you don't need to rebuild your chart, right? So here I have category on X, here I have category now on Y, so that the logic of it still works. For the last chart category, let's add another dimension, the date, because line charts mostly make sense if you can visualize something over time. So if we pick line, we see again on x-axis we can opt for what to show, and on y-axis our values. And we see one thing, of course, if we look at this chart, this doesn't make a lot of sense because on the y-axis we now map the different our categories, which again for a line chart is usually not what you want to do. Here I think pretty much all the time on X you want to show a date property. Now the really, really cool thing about charts is that if you hover over date, you see again you have aggregation options. So even though I have a date here everywhere, I can also show relative or grouping by week, month, and year. But let's start with day for now. So if we pick date, we go old to new, that makes sense. And then again, we can see what we want to show, and definitely not the count, right? That doesn't make any sense. So instead, what we want to show is we want to show the time spent on per day, maybe. So now we see, okay, we have currently broken out into the individual groupings. So let's remove the groupings here. That makes it a bit easier to see. And now we see, okay, this is how much time we overall tracked on all our different elements. Again, if we turn grouping on, we get a different line. So we can say, okay, please group it by category. And now I can see on my different days, which are only 3, August 1st, August 6th, August 7th, I see, okay, how much time did I spend every day on my different activities. All right, I quickly added in a few more dates just so we can in a second visualize how it changes if we visualize a week. But first, two other style options. First, what we can do is we can, under style options, make sure that we smooth the line, makes it a bit easier to view. And then one other thing, and that can be a bit confusing depending on what you want to show. Here, it seems like, right, like food is my highest category, but if I hover over it, I actually see, well, 6 hours of work, only 2.5 hours of food. Why is food like so high? That's again because our stacking option is currently, switched, set to stacking. So that means they just go on top of each other for every single day, and then based on the order that we have. So if we want to instead see, okay, like realistically, how much time do we ever spend? We do not stack. And now we can see, yes, on this day, right, 6 hours of work, here 5 hours of food. Now it makes a lot more sense. And then last but not least, right, what happens if we change our grouping for the day? So we can say show by date, but please group by week, and then just like adds all these things together. So here, right, again, because we spend now, my data is not ideal for the preparation. So let's actually say we go in here and put all these things in a much earlier week. Let's select all of these and say date here should actually be here. We now see, okay, now we have a relative distribution over our weeks. It automatically calculates these weeks, so we don't need to add any formulas to our charts to do that. It's super, super easy to integrate. Now, two more things that are really important to know when it comes to using these charts. First, rollups are currently not supported. So if you have rollup properties in your database, you won't see them as options to map them, neither as the x-axis nor the y-axis. But formulas work. And since the new Notion formulas support most of the things that you can do with rollups, you shouldn't just use a formula to pull in the data from another database. Most formulas work. There is a certain stop point where Notion currently says, okay, you can't use specific formulas that are very recursive or that are very calculation heavy, just to make sure that charts keep performing well. But for most of the standard use cases, right, if you have another chart connected with this and pull some information about it in, that should work without any issues. And then second, a very minor one, but you can of course also create charts simply by typing /chart, and then you get all these options. And as usually, you have the option to just pick an existing database for data, right, and will automatically try to match it. Or you can create a new chart. And if you do that, it gives you this chart view and of course a data view, because you need to input something to be able to, well, render anything. One thing to keep in mind is that charts currently excel at visualizing data across your whole database or a certain subset of it. But they are not very good when it comes to analyzing data across several databases or within one single entry. Let me show you what I mean. Before charts, one thing that you would typically do to get any type of analytics is to create a separate analytics database and then relate it to the entry or the databases where you have your actual entries in. And then you can use formulas, right, to pull it in. So here in this case, we have one database for my purchases, so my income, and one for my expenses. And I related them both here, and then I use some simple formulas to just give me the total amount in these categories. You could also use a rollup, of course. Now, one very intuitive thing that you might think would work is to say, well, okay, I just want to have a simple pie chart that analyzes that. So let's say type chart, give me a donut chart, and then pick my financial analytics for charts. And here, I don't want to see all the relations, right? I want to see actually the names. I want to see for the year 2024, how that works. And now you see the issue that we run through. I can, under each slice represents, only pick either total expenses or total income. There's currently, in the way the Notion charts work, no option to map two properties of your database at the same time as values, right? You can have one property for the category, one property for the value, not both at the same time. Which means in these situations, you can't visualize actually based off your main chart. What you can of course do is say, okay, on this chart, I don't want to visualize this. I want to visualize my my expenses. And here I could do that very well. But the problem now is that if I have one of these setups where I have purchases and analytics in expenses in two separate databases, I can again not get it in one and the same chart. So that means for the future, until Notion releases the option to have, multiple properties mapped in one chart, you might have to rethink the way you architect your databases. So particular for these cash flow things, for example, you would need to have them in one database. So instead of having one for expenses and one for income, you would have one big database for cash flow and then label things with tags, whether it's inflow or outflow, and then you can visualize it without any problem. But yeah, if you run into a weird roadblock by trying to visualize something, keep in mind, Notion charts, amazing to visualize things in one database or a certain subset with filters, but not so good if you want to visualize things within the same entry, right? So within the same row of a database, or across several databases. So for certain use cases, you're still better off using a third-party tool, for example, Rows, and then just embed the chart that you generate there into Notion. If you're curious how that works, I've got a video linked in the description. Still, this is an amazing update for Notion that will unlock a ton of new features and use cases. And there actually is a workaround to visualize data across several databases. So stick around until the end of the video to make sure you don't miss that. Next, let's quickly talk about sharing and security. Since charts are database views in Notion, they behave exactly like all your other database views. That means you can't just take a chart based off, maybe your internal giant task list and then create a filter for only the tasks that apply to a certain client and then share that chart with the client. The client will need to have access to your complete chart task database in order to see the chart. And very importantly, this applies both to pages that you share with someone as a guest and pages that you publish as Notion sites. So also, if you publish a Notion site, the database that the chart draws from needs to be published as well. This is so important. I see a lot of confusion and misconception around this, so let me repeat this. There is currently no 100% secure way to share only a subset of your database with someone else without going into each individual page and changing the share settings. You will have to use a third-party tool. I do have tutorials for that, but other than that, Notion Charts is still best used for internal use cases to show something to your team and visualize these things rather than build dashboards for external parties. What's more, Notion Charts currently won't export if you export your Notion page, so that's also not an option to share them. But the team has built in a really cool feature for snapshot reporting. In order to get a snapshot of your chart, all you need to do is click on the three dots, and then here under Save Chart As, you have the option to download it either as a PNG or as an SVG with an automatically generated background or with no background. Super nice. So I can, if I have to create a marketing report and I need to share with someone who doesn't have access to the database, I can say, okay, copy this as a PNG and then paste it somewhere on my page. And then it's an image, right? It doesn't live update anymore, but still you can use that to share the results of your visualizations. Now let's talk availability. Notion charts are mostly a premium feature. On the free plan, you get one chart. And on all paid plans, you have unlimited charts. And an important note for all template users and creators, if someone creates a template with a ton of charts in them, and you as a free user download a template, you will be able to only see one of these charts. Unless, of course, you already have a chart active in your workspace, then you'll see none of them. But the second you upgrade to a paid plan, all these charts will appear because they still exist as blocks on the page, they just don't render any data. Alright, now that you know everything there is to know about charts, let's look at some of my favorite use cases that you should try out today. Number 1, visualize project progress. I mean, charts were just made for project management. So just two very simple use cases to start things off. We can, of course, visualize across our company, right, what status our projects are in, and do that either as a bar chart or as a nice simple pie chart. And top trick, because you have the filter options on your charts, you can use self-referential filters to create automatically charts on your projects. So let's say your projects, right, you have this typical setup with projects and tasks, and on your project you already have this progress bar, which is nice. But now when you open it up, you can have actually a database or like a chart view inside with it that automatically shows you, okay, how many of the tasks that are related are done and not done. And again, since this is done through a self-referential filter, whenever you create a new project, it will automatically have this chart on it. Now, one quick, very important thing in order to generate this, remember, we can't currently visualize things on one entry. So what doesn't work is to say on our project, creating properties that count how many tasks are done and not done, and then trying to visualize the individual project entry. Instead, what we do here is we visualize tasks, and we say whatever tasks are related to this project, right? So the setup here, we have our chart, and then under filter, we say the rule is that please show me only tasks where the project contains the thing that I'm currently looking at. Number 2, time tracking breakdowns. This is the prime example that we also already saw during the explanation of how charts work. So we can either, if we have these simple trackers, so we just say, okay, what do I do in a day? Visualize that and say, okay, how does it break down on these individual categories? Or if you have proper time tracking, because, for example, you have a small business and you want to see how you spend your time, and you have this type of setup, right? You can then also, of course, use the charts to visualize that. And say, for example, okay, I want to see how I spend my time across different categories, right? So in this case, we have this simple time tracker. We have a start time and end time that get automatically filled whenever I start and stop a tracker, and then we calculate the difference between those times and just have these tags at the end. And that helps me to visualize then, okay, like how does it break down, either as a chart, a pie chart, or as a bar chart. Number 3, track your readings. This one is pretty fun if you have a second brain in Notion, which a lot of people have. So the example is for reading, but of course you can do it for pretty much anything that you consume and track it in Notion. So we could, for example, say, let's show me my books by category. So here I have a bunch of my books, and I have the categories, and I want to see, okay, how many memoirs did I actually read? How many psychology books? And so on and so on. And again, right through filters, we can break it down so we can make sure that only the books that I actually read pop up here. So if 3 of these books, we say actually they are, not started, then you see our chart automatically updates to reflect it. And of course, for every book that I add back in, again, we have the value immediately here. Next up, we have also books by completion, and that is, let's move myself out of the way. We go down here, and here we can then say, okay, when did we actually finish that book? Now for that, what you need is another property on your database, a property called completion date. And don't worry, you don't need to fill that out manually, because since Notion launched database automations, we finally have a way to automatically fill out the date. So you just set up a quick, simple database automation that says, okay, whenever the status of something changes to done, please fill in the current time for the completion date. And then you can use that completion date to visualize a bunch of things. For example, you could have this chart which breaks it down by month. And again, remember, we can use the grouping of the date function to just show us these months without having to calculate them. So we see, okay, we read a lot in July, but not so much in June. Or as a stacked bar chart, right, if we want to break it down with the groupings into the individual categories of my books. Number 4, visualize any trend over time. For a lot of things, it's kind of hard to capture trends over a long term. For example, when I was suffering from RSI and had pain in my wrists, it was always a problem when I went to the doctor and tried to describe, okay, like how did the last few weeks go? Like, well, how actually did they go? Of course, I could sometimes write down some numbers for the individual days, but still, like, just showing him that alone doesn't give a good indication of, okay, where are we actually trending towards to? But with charts, it's actually super simple. So this is a pain diary, and shout out to Marie Poulin, who had that idea and shared it on Twitter. So here what we have is we just have our days, right? And we have a pain score, we can add a commentary for it, and then again, most importantly, a specific date. So you can imagine this could be your diary. You could also track your mood in here, right? Tons of things that could be here. In this case, it's pain. And then we can have a chart first for our individual days, right? And visualize, okay, so here we see there must have been something September 9th, 10th, and 11th that was really bad. So maybe let's look back at this and see what could have caused that. And then here we have a much better trend, so maybe, again, time to look at this and see what might have helped me there. Or, again, if we want to have a much broader horizon and zoom out a bit, we can do our weekly roundup. And again, use the automatic grouping feature by weeks and say, okay, how are we actually trending? And here, good news, I mean, we had like a little bit of a peak here, but then we're currently trending down and things move in the right direction. Now, if you have this in a diary, you could then, of course, add the other grouping feature in, right? So if you have like in your entries here, you have different things for like different moods, then you could have the different moods visualized here separately. Just keep in mind, in these cases, you can't have your mood on separate properties because currently Notion doesn't support mapping several properties, but you would need to have like, Monday, emotions as one entry, and then Monday workout if you wanted to visualize them in the same chart. So makes it a bit tricky, but hopefully Notion soon releases multiple properties to map them here as well. Number 5, build a motivational progress tracker. This one is a super fun one if you need an extra bit of motivation, either for yourself or in a team and company environment. So what we've done here is we just have our usual task tracker, and we have a due date. And then what we do is we create a chart and we say, okay, we want a bar chart. We want to show the by done status. So if you have a status property, it would be that. Here it's just a checkbox. So that's what we want to show down. So we get our no done and done options down here. And then we want to make sure we show the count of the individual tasks as the elements. And that way, what we can then have, if we add this to a sync block, is a weekly progress. So one last thing, of course, there's a filter where we say, okay, the due date is relative to this week. And that means I can, whenever I click something here and say, okay, this is done, we can see in real time how my, my to-do list shrinks and my done chart goes up. Top tip. If you do this in a team environment and you do it for individual dashboards, you can combine it with the me filter, right? So you can add another filter on there and say, okay, and responsible is me, and then just add this chart to all your the dashboards that you build for your individual contributors, hopefully through a database template, so you don't need to do it individually, but can do it programmatically. And then they all have their own unique progress chart where they can keep track of, okay, how are they moving from a lot of tasks that are open to everything done within the week. Number 6 is a deep dive into your financials. Now, there's so much that we can do with finance data, and this could be a whole separate video. If you want that, let me know down below, but I'm trying to cover a lot of things already here. Let's say we have, again, our company. This is my fictional company that sells Notion mugs, and we have 3 different products, and we're tracking who buys them and when that happened. Now I can quickly visualize that information and, for example, figure out, well, what is my most successful product? Probably with a pie chart. And here the setup, again, super simple. We want to show the product, so the actual name here, because they are all the same when it's the same product. And then each slice represents the amount paid. And I can see, well, the travel mug definitely is my most successful product. I can then also try to identify purchasing trends. So if I want to see, over time, maybe map that to my marketing efforts, and I can see, okay, whatever the marketing team did on August 1st, that worked. We probably want to rerun that campaign or something similar to that. And again, here the setup, fairly straightforward. We want to show our day, that's why we need purchase day. And then we just want to show the amount paid, and here the sum, right? And we don't want to have the average paid on this day, we want to have the total amount. That's really, really important. Another really cool trick that you can do with line charts that we haven't talked about yet is you can actually show cumulative trends. So if we want to visualize our earnings, we can do that as well. And all we need to do is toggle on this little cumulative toggle. So you see, if I toggle it off, I get the same chart as before. But if I turn it on, it just keeps adding the value from the previous step. Super, super useful for a lot of use cases, particularly here, right, where you want to see, okay, earnings go up. This is a good sign. And then last but not least, we can identify our best customers and say, okay, give me a chart and break it down by the person who bought it, right? That's what I have on my x-axis. And then I want to have the value that they've spent on here. Now, one little drawback with this is that currently, unfortunately, charts don't allow us to limit the number of elements that it shows, right? Remember, on a database like this, on a normal database view, I can go in, I can say, please load only 10 pages. And then I only have 10 entries here. I'd love to see this as a new feature on charts soon. So I can say, okay, please only show me 10 entries, and then do a sort and show me, by the highest, so I can see the 10 highest spenders here. Because if you have a ton of people, that might get quite cumbersome. But then in the meantime, you can either just set a filter and say, okay, exclude small amounts, or you could use a workaround with formula. It's a bit more complex. If you want to see that, let me know down below in the comments. But that way you can also sort of hack together a certain amount of numbers that are only shown here. Moving on, because this is only the start. Let's say we have our expenses. So here we have all the tools that we pay for. We pay for a lot of tools at Notion Mugs and the department that spends. So let's figure out which department spends the most. In this case, it's clearly sales, project management, and marketing. Maybe I should have a talk and chat with them. Setup, super straightforward. We show our department, right? This as the category, and then just the amount paid in the sum. Or maybe I want to show similar to my revenue, right? How do my costs evolve over the months? Very important for cash flow planning. So I can see at a glance, okay, so we actually also are trending up. Might want to talk again, right, to the team and see whether we can reduce some things to make sure the costs don't run away. And then last but not least, as mentioned previously, right, here we have, in this case, we have sort of the suboptimal setup because we have them in separate charts. But if we want to analyze them specifically, it's still helpful. Probably the better way to set them up for the moment is to have it all in one database. We can still create the other charts with additional filters. But if we have them all in one database, in this cash flow view, we can then also get the other analytics, right? We can get a split for the different weeks, months. So here we have, we say, okay, please show me the date and group it by month. And then show me as the values the amount paid. So I see, okay, I made in January $395 selling mugs, but I spent $4.5K. Maybe a reason for concern. Or we can also visualize our cash flow. So we can say, okay, please show me my cost and my expenses next to each other. And of course, here, green for the cost, that might be a bit confusing. But remember our trick, we can change this outflow from this to red, and then it automatically changes the color here as long as we have it on auto. Or we can, of course, have both things aggregated. In this case, show the net result visualization with the cumulative feature again. And this doesn't look too good, right? We went from $20 in profits to minus $4.5K in losses within the span of 2 months. So again, maybe need to spend a bit more time on Notion Mugs and turn the ship around. And by the way, you can download all the charts and setups that I'm sharing here for free with the link in the description. Number 7 is all about meeting analytics. Meetings sometimes get an unnecessarily bad rap, right? They can be very productive, but you still might want to keep tabs on how often your people meet and see whether it actually results in any output. So this visualization is great for that. Here we have a simple meetings database, and in this case we have attendees as multi-select, but of course you would usually use a person property. I just don't have enough people in this workspace to do it. So we're going to use that instead. And here we can visualize first, okay, like which people spend the most time in meetings, right? Bob and Eva, both with 28. Maybe we can find a way to, unblock them in certain areas so they have more time to focus on the actual work. Setup, again, fairly straightforward. This time we pick a horizontal bar chart. We want to show on the x-axis. Here it's a bit, you need to think around, right? This is the actual value. We want to show the count, and on y, we want to show the attendees. And then we just want to sort count high to low so that we have our top people always up here. Now, another thing that we could do is you could say time spent in meetings. This is a fun one. So if you track actually the meeting duration, so in this case, we just have a date here, but I have actually another property hidden here that says, okay, what is the duration? And then this collective meeting time. You might have seen it. It went viral a bit from, I think it's Google, where you can see, okay, like how much time do you spend collectively in meetings? And in this case, we have used this to then visualize and see, okay, in terms of time spent in meetings, Bob 950 minutes, Eva 1020. But we could also, of course, change that to say, okay, actually show me the total amount of meeting time within a given week. So for that, what we would do is we would change our x-axis. We would actually first pick a line chart. Then we want to show the date by week. And then instead of the count, we want to show our collective meeting time, the sum. And we see then, okay, in this week, October 2nd to 9th, we had a ton of meetings. Again, can look back at it, see what caused that, and quickly analyze it. Or then, last but not least, meetings per week. If we want to have more of a regular breakdown with just the charts, or like a stacked bar chart where we can also see like how much individual people spend in meetings. Again, depends a bit on what you're looking for, but a lot of fun opportunities. With number 8, you can take a look at your workout history. Outside of a company context, these charts are really, really great for motivation and to just, again, see your long-term trends. So here, this time we have our workout history. In the database, we have the name of our workout, the session duration, and the burned calories, and tons of ways, even with only these simple things that we track, to visualize them. So we could think about, okay, how do we split our time between workouts? I spend apparently a lot of time swimming, at least according to the AI that created that sample data. Or we could have a look at our weekly performance and break down the calories that we burn in every single week. So this week, I haven't tracked many weeks in February 2023, but apparently in this week, I did not work out a lot. Or time spent per exercise, where we then say, okay, give me this bar chart from the side, and then I want to see, swimming, we could guess that from the workout split up here, but here we have the different visualization with the numbers. And last but not least, time spent per exercise and month, where we take this bar chart and now add a grouping, right? So it's the same setup where we say, okay, show me the workout name here, show me the session duration here, and then please group, or I would say better call it split or drill down, and break it down into the individual months. So we see the swimming thing comes mainly from Jan. That's why I really swam a ridiculous amount of time in Feb. It's all a lot more balanced. Number 9 is a personal favorite of mine. It's so useful for sprint tracking because finally we have burn down and burn up charts natively in Notion. This is probably the chart I'm most excited for because I work so often with companies that implement sprints and need a better way of tracking their progress. Now, again, finally, burn up, burn down charts. If you don't know what they are, they're basically charts that tell you from 0 to 100% in case of burn up, or from 100% to 0, how your task completion looks in a sprint. So you can see, right, if you review your sprint later, you can see, or like during it, you can see like how your completion rate tracks to a certain point. Now, before that, in Notion, that wasn't possible, and you might also at first glimpse think it doesn't really work, because if you just create a normal chart and try to visualize these things, you end up with something more like this, where you have, okay, on August 5th, I finished 3 tasks, here finished 1, 4, 10, 6, and 5. That's not what we want to see, right? We don't want to just see like the task completion per day. We want to see how it goes up. And of course, we could change that to a line chart and then turn on cumulative, but it would still not go up to 100%, right? It's nearly there, but it's not the percent element that we actually want. What we want instead, in order to make this a percent, are 2 helper properties. First, quick thing I forgot, you of course need the done date again on your tasks, and that the same procedure as before with the books, you can get through a simple Notion automation that automatically fills it whenever you set it to done. All right, back to the percents. How can we do that? Well, you need a separate database actually. But in most cases, in particular for sprints, that shouldn't be an issue because all your tasks should anyway roll up to a sprint, right? So here we have our sprint chart, we have all our tasks connected, and we see we have 29 tasks in this specific sprint. What we can then do on tasks is we can write a property, and it will be actually different properties, whether it's a burn up or burn down one. Let's start with burn up because that's much easier. So in burn up, all you want to do is you want to go in and you want to calculate how much of 100% does this one task make up. So it's just one and then divided by the number of sprints connected to this. And that way we can then say here in this chart, please map our sprint progress to 3.4% and make it cumulative. And that way our percent values just keep adding up. Very straightforward. The other one is a bit more complicated, but it works as well because in order to burn down, we need to have the actual percent value there. We can't just turn on cumulative because if we were to do that, right, it would go up. There's no way to inverse a chart in Notion right now. But what we can do instead is we can write a bit more complicated formula where we go in and figure out, okay, how many tasks do we have and how many tasks were finished before the task that we currently look at. And through that, get our actual percentage. Again, bit complicated formula, but you can download this for free as a template. And if you want me to do a deep dive in this, let me know. I'll probably have one already coming up hopefully soon where we talk about the formula in detail. But through that, you can then create this nice burn down chart from, like all the way up, all the way down, hopefully, if you manage to finish your sprint in time. Number 10 allows you to break down your tasks by employee. This is a great overview to have on a management dashboard, right? You want to keep track on what your direct reports are up to. You want to make sure that you see when they finish something or when you might have to intervene and, ask them whether you can unblock them. And a simple way to do that now is through this task check-in, where we say, okay, please show me on this one the person down below. And both of them are my picture because, again, I'm alone in this workspace, but I have two different accounts in it. And the next thing we want to do is show the count of individual tasks. And then we want to group it or split it by the fact whether it's overdue or not. So we see, okay, person 1 has 7 normal tasks and 3 overdue. The other person has just 6 overdue tasks. So definitely something to look at. But very easy to set up, should be on every manager's dashboard in Notion. And number 11 identifies how the workload is distributed across your company. This one is also a must-have for project managers if you track the different sizes of your tasks. Of course, that works in some industries better than others, particularly if you're in engineering, right? You often will break down your different tasks into sizes, maybe from S to L, and then you can just assign it a rough estimate of how much that should typically take, right? In this case, we just estimate that like a small task takes 30 minutes, a big one takes 60 and then 90, all the way up to 120. And then what we can do is we can, again, break it down by person down below. But this time, we want to have the sum of our estimated time. So when we plan out something, and we can then, of course, filter this and say, okay, show me only the task in the next month. So when I then plan my next month, I know, okay, this person here, they probably have enough on their plate already, but he still has some capacity, so let's give him some additional tasks. And last but certainly not least, a systems health check. And this also shows you the workaround that I promised earlier on how to visualize information across several databases in one chart. This is a great use case for system admins at larger companies that need to keep track of, how is the overall state of our Notion space. Or also, if you're an individual and you want to make sure that your Notion space doesn't descend into chaos because you forget to fill out some things. Specifically, what this means is you would define, okay, what are the main databases where I want to keep track of things, and then figure out what things do you want to keep track of. So in this case, we have a fairly standard one. We have want to see for tasks, which ones are overdue and which ones don't have a due date, because here we need to fix something, which documents don't have an owner or which ones are outdated, and which projects are off track or which ones don't have sufficient data. Now, in most of these cases, you can then check that directly for overdue tasks or so, but for some of them, like sufficient data, you might want to create something called a helper formula on your projects, where you say, okay, please give me a checkbox based on whether, the things that I always want to fill out are filled out or not. That's the basic setup for the rest of the system. And now here, to create this sort of like database that is able to visualize information across 3 different databases, right? So we have documents, we have tasks and projects all in different places, but in one chart. What we need to do is a slightly different setup than usually. We need to create every metric that we want to track in this chart as an individual entry, right? Again, this changes the way that we usually would think about database setup. Usually, we would just set up and have one entry for team stats and then create these things as properties because it's a lot more scalable. In this case, we need to do this a bit more individually. And after we do this, what we want to do is we want to first give it type so we can group it together more easily. And then we need to have relations. We need to have relations to every single other database. So we see docs, projects, and tasks are there as well. They are just hidden. And then what we do next is we relate all the entries in that other database to this corresponding tracker, right? We can do that through templates so that or like through an automation, so that automatically happens whenever you create something and you don't need to do it manually. And then, and that's the last step, you need to create this display property, which is basically a large ifs or switch statement that goes in and says, okay, if the name of this is documents without owner, then please go into documents and figure out which ones don't have an owner, and so on and so on. So you need to write this as an individual formula element inside this one big formula for every single metric that you want to keep track of. So again, it's a workaround. It won't work in all situations. In some situations, you will just have too much data, but it's great if you have a target limited amount of things that you want to look at. And because we've done that, we now have all the information that we used to have across different databases or different properties. We have that now in one big property. And that we can then use to visualize. So here we have our setup where we show the name of the entry and then the display sum up here. And of course, this trick could be used in the same way to do the finance example that we had before, right? We could also have a finance tracker then where we say, okay, we have one entry for inflow, one for outflow, and then we have this switch statement that pulls in all the elements from the other thing. So it is possible to make your finance tracker still work if you have two different databases for it, but it takes a little bit of an extra setup. Those were a lot of charts. So now to finish off this video, let's just quickly look at how you can combine these charts to build either a personal or a company dashboard. I think it's safe to say that personal dashboards in Notion will never be the same. I mean, just look at how gorgeous this is. So now here we have now an aggregated view of all the things that go on in our life. And in this case, this person cares about their training progress and the daily pain journal a lot. So they are up top. And they take up a bit more space because I really like the several column layouts if you want to, have visualized charts on your dashboard. But in particular with these line charts, like having more breathing room really comes in handy. And then for the other charts, it's fine to have them in 3 columns. So here I write the other priorities, of course, just want to have a bit of motivation boost to see whether I'm finishing my to-do list. In case I'm tracking my time, I just want to check in, okay, how did I spend it? Maybe this is also filtered for today. So it just shows me actively how my current day looks like. And then books this month, right? How's my reading progress going? I'm reading a lot of biographies, but not so much of the other things that I want to do. And yeah, just a great, simple starting point. And of course, you would then add like links, right, to your specific dashboards everywhere to like dive deeper into, okay, here's my time tracker or here's my to-do list. But as a central venture point and like HQ, it's really, really great to have. In all fairness though, while it's certainly nice to have for individual use cases, I think companies are definitely the ones that are going to profit the most from this. This is insane, the amount of like insights that you can get now into your company and how people are performing across different departments, unrivaled. So for example here, right, this is just a quick manager dashboard, how it could look like for senior management. We have our project health, just see at a glance, okay, where do we stand? Our employee workload, I know they both equally busy. Our current sprint performance looks pretty good. We will finish on time. Time spent in meetings, tasks at risk, right? This is just one where we say, okay, maybe what are certain criteria for at risk that it's not finished on the due date, that it's not finished after the due date. Whatever metrics you're already tracking in your database, you can now show here at one glance. And of course, our cash flow, not looking too good, but when someone has to take care of it. So good to be able to visualize this all in one place. And you can, of course, take this much, much further. Think of OKRs and tracking, visualizing how you make progress towards your main OKRs throughout the week. So like who is behind on their KPIs, like so many things. Really, really excited for that. And if you need any help with implementing these for your business, of course, feel free to contact me. Happy to be of help. And yeah, again, just such a great update for business use cases. So much for this first look at Notion charts. What are you going to build first with this amazing new feature? I'd love to hear it. Let me know down below in the comments. Now, if this finally convinced you to run your business in Notion because you can now, well, visualize anything, but don't quite know where to start, don't worry, I've got you covered. Here is a full tutorial that will teach you how to go from an empty page to a fully set up Notion workspace for your company. Just click here and I'll see you in a second.